Welcome to the School Without Suffering podcast. I'm your host, Laura Fragamini, founder and principal of School Without Suffering. This season, I'm talking with community members who have firsthand experiences of suffering in school, sharing their perspectives as students, teachers, and parents. My hope is that these conversations show each of us that we are not alone and inspire us to envision and enact change for your individual family and for learners everywhere. Let's dive in. In this episode, you're going to be hearing my conversation with Polly Solomon, a circus artist and teaching artist who lives with chronic migraine, a disability that deeply impacted her school experience while she was growing up. I'll let her take it from here.
And it very much affected my experience in school. A big part of that is when I was growing up in school in the 90s and early aughts, for the most part, doctors weren't diagnosing migraine in children. And what I've come to learn as I've learned more about how my body works and seen it change through time is I think that part of that is that migraine doesn't present the same in children as it does in adults. My experience of my migraines has changed as I've gotten older and changed many times. And I think that really is something that's gotten in the way of healthcare practitioners being able to figure out what's wrong. And for me as a young person, this meant that I had a lot of days where I just didn't feel good. And for me, the most troubling thing, the thing I would tell my mom is my stomach hurts. And I always had headaches, but I was kind of able to ignore the headache. But when it got bad enough that my stomach hurt, then I was really not feeling it, not gelling. And I would want to stay home because I didn't feel good. And you know, the doctors, one of the things about migraines is that as far as tests and things like that are concerned, quote, nothing's wrong. Nothing, your blood work is fine. Even I've had a couple MRIs done, your brain looks normal. Any tests they can run, you present as a typical healthy human being. So I was just kind of labeled a complainy kid. And I spent a lot of time just kind of vaguely, quote unquote, not feeling good. And by the time I was an adolescent, a tween, my mother, who's a therapist, thought that I might be depressed and started having me see a therapist. And I honestly didn't even know why I was there. And they'd be like, do you want to talk about anything? And I'd be like, no, not really. And I was really vindicated a couple years ago. I found an amazing neurologist finally. And one of the things she said to me at one point is that migraines sometimes present as depression.
Wow.
And I was like, eye-opening, oh my goodness. I've been on this whole journey of all of these things that were different in my life because I was experiencing these migraines. And ultimately, everything came to a head when I was in 9th grade. And in our district, the switch between middle school and high school meant you went to being the last kids to being bused to school to being the first kids to bus to school. So I all of a sudden had a very early morning. And among other things, also, if I don't get enough sleep, I tend to get a migraine. And all of a sudden, I needed to be a functioning human being at 7 o'clock in the morning. And very frequently woke up. And also I was a teenager, so I was staying up late and distracted, and the migraines might also contribute to sleeping disorders and who knows. But I wasn't getting enough sleep. I was waking up in the morning feeling very sick. And some mornings, a couple hours later, I'd be feeling well enough. I would let my mom take me into school. I'd go in late. But I wound up amassing a large amount of absences pretty quickly this way. And I'm in New York State, and in New York State, we have, and I know all over the country, there are a lot of truancy laws about you have to be in school X number of days. And by the time we got to January in the school year, I had maxed out the amount of legal absences for at least my first two period classes, the first two classes in the morning. Because like I said, if I could later in the day go into school, I would. And that was more or less the beginning of a nightmare. And I think the thing I want to add before I say anything else is I was also one of those kids you consider an exceptional student. I was a straight A without trying kind of kid. And none of this ever affected my grades. And part of the fact that there was no room for that, I think, is the problem. That they couldn't see a student who was in no way being impacted academically and go, well, how can we do things differently? There just wasn't the imagination, the room, the awareness for that at the time in the place that I was. So around January, which we're only like hitting midterms, I had hit the maximum amount of absences you can have for the year. And the school said, well, if we don't do something, you're going to fail 9th grade. And from a straight A student, that's not the thing you want to hear, you know? And the school went about trying to figure out what to do with me. And the answer became that they put me in a program that was housed in the same building, that was intended for children who were too emotionally disturbed to be in a normal classroom environment. Which was not the case for me, and not really an appropriate place for me to be. But my parents, or I believe my parents were told, and I was told, that the only way I was going to be allowed to finish my 9th grade year and move on to 10th grade was if I was in this program. And it meant things like I was taken out of my classes and put in classes in the program. It meant that I was required to once a week go to a group counseling and an individual counseling session. And and at some point I was allowed to return to some of my classroom, because the program they put me in absolutely wasn't meeting my needs academically. At one point it was decided that I get the feeling they knew all along that this wasn't the appropriate solution for me. And they started putting me through more testing. And I was like, at one point I put on the brakes and I said, I want to know what you're testing me for and what the possible outcomes are of these tests, or I'm not going to keep doing it. And rather than communicating openly with me, they just stopped giving me the tests. And I think I found out years later, they were like trying to put me in a gifted and talented program, see if I qualified for a gifted and talented program instead. But there was so little transparency. There was so little communication. And I was meanwhile in an environment where I once missed a class outside of the program because my books were in the classroom inside the program, and we were locked out because another student had thrown a desk. So it wasn't a particularly safe space to be in. I was talking weekly with a therapist who I didn't know and didn't trust. And at one point he said to me, like, well, do you ever feel depressed? And I was a very smart kid. And I looked at him and I went, you know, you work in a high school, right? I was like, next time the bell rings, go out into the hallway and I want you to find one student who answers no to the question, do you ever feel depressed?
Yeah.
Like, I'm 14, you know? Yeah. Yeah, sometimes I feel depressed. I didn't feel like it was getting in my way. Just life is sad sometimes when you're 14. So I did it. I went to the program. It was not the right place for me. I was not getting the instruction I was supposed to get. And then ultimately at the end of the school year, I've somehow, you know, wrestled my way through these 5 months, 6 months of school. And several things happened all at once. One is that I didn't qualify to take the Regents exam for biology, because with them pulling me out for all this testing, I had been told that I was going to take the history final for the program because I hadn't been allowed to return to that class. A week before the final, I was told actually I needed to take the test for the class I hadn't been in for 5 months. And to be honest, I refused. I didn't sit the test. It was just too much. Yeah. That I felt like I had been betrayed, I'd been lied to. I didn't say, so that's test number 2 was my history test. Test number 3 was my English test, which was a class I had returned to. But part of the test was given in classroom time instead of during the designated finals time. I was told, you cannot miss finals time. You will not be given a makeup, but class time is different. And this teacher chose to give part of the final during classroom time when I was not present, and then chose to not let me make up that 40% of the test or whatever it was. So even though I had been in this program and I had done everything they had told me to do, I exited the school year having failed 3 academic classes and being told I was going to repeat 9th grade.
What did that do to you?
A lot of things, lot of things. For one thing, so at that point, my parents pulled me out of the school and sent me to a private school, which was a very good thing. And they allowed me to go to 9th to 10th grade. And I graduated with one of the most heavy class loads that anyone ever graduated with. But I was terrified. I was really scared. And when I went to this second school, I had it in my head that I'm getting a second chance and that I must have done something wrong and I can't do that again. Mm. And I was terrified to miss a day of school. And the good news is I was in a very small private school where you could walk into the headmaster's office and say, hey, this is up with me. Like at one point, the next year I got mono, and I was like, I went in and I talked to the headmaster and I said, I'm either can do my homework or be in school. I don't have the energy for both. Mm-hmm. And he went, great, be in school. And I had that flexibility. I was in a much more nurturing environment, but I was terrified to miss school. Even I went into college and I was like, I told myself, you can't slip once. If you get into a pattern of missing class again, like I really thought something was wrong with me. Mm. And there was, I had migraines, but I thought like, I am a bad person. I did this thing, you know? And even, like I said, even in college, I was terrified. There's one day, I don't know what was going on, but I was like, I do not want to go to this class right now. It was just one class, but I was like, but I have to go. I cannot get into the habit of letting myself miss. And I got there and there was a note up on the door that class was canceled. And I thought it was like the best gift in the world that I had been rewarded for dragging myself across campus to this class. But, and that went into my professional life. And I work in the performing arts. And there's also a very heavy, the show must go on. Nothing can stop us. And I was sick all the time. I only, in the past 4 years of my life, started to find a way, find the right medications to control this in any way. And I was sick all the time. And I programmed myself to ignore it, to do really big, incredible, and I'm in the circus, sometimes dangerous things as a sick person. And it's not safe and it's not healthy. and it's not a good, you wind up without boundaries. Like I learned that I can't say no to things from that. I can't say, no, I can't do that. And it's something I'm just undoing in my life now, and seeing what damage was there and how it impacted me and how much it's impacted my adult life. Yeah. And I mean, as a teenager, I was like, well, you can't trust adults. Mm-hmm. Because they lie, because they're gonna put you in these terrible, educators who are supposed to protect you are gonna put you in these terrible situations. Yeah, it was a really, it still has stuck with me.
Yeah. Yeah. And you just mentioned that you learned to not have boundaries, but it sounded like in 9th grade, you actually started out with some pretty good boundaries.
I was a really smart kid.
Yeah.
I was the kid who in some ways went above and beyond. Like I remember this art project where we had to like research an artist and then like do something in the style of that artist. And I got Christo. And the other kid who got Christo made a little diorama of floating islands. I got permission to do an art installation in the lobby where I wrapped a desk. Like, I was always, I have a huge imagination. I do things in a huge, vivid way. But yeah, I was definitely willing to be like, hold on, something's not right.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I felt like I kept getting punished for that.
Right.
You know, like I went to the social worker who I did feel I could trust and was given advice and tried to implement that advice and had the support I needed taken away from me. And I played by the rules and I went to the classes and I did the things and I had this really awful experience so that I could move on with my life. And then was told, too bad, you didn't do enough.
Mm-hmm.
And it took away a lot of trust. And it did. And I was like, wow, yeah, maybe there's some boundaries I can't have. Maybe I can't say no to things. Maybe because that's just going to hurt me.
Yeah. And you learned fear and you learned that there's morally something wrong with you.
Yeah.
Like you said, like,
yeah.
And you went to a private school, you got really good grades, you had a massive course load, graduated, like, and probably everyone said, wow, what a success.
For the most part, it's interesting. I applied to Yale. I didn't get in, but I applied to Yale. And at one point I went to a second interview, and which I was like, oh wow, I got a second interview. And this gets into a lot of like gatekeeping in education, I feel like, because we lived in a different part of the county than where the interview was, and I went there, and it's a much more affluent part of the county, and it was like one of those houses where you feel like the living room furniture is never touched.
Yeah.
And that was very much not my experience and not my upbringing. And so I was already very uncomfortable. And like, now that I'm an adult and in education, I'm like, that's gatekeeping. And I had this interview, and one of the questions she asked me was, what do you think changed between failing ninth grade and graduating a straight A AP student? And at the time, I was too close to the trauma. I didn't even want to talk about it. I didn't want to say it out loud. I definitely hadn't processed it yet. I wasn't mature enough to be able to say, oh yes, this is what happened to me. It was only 2.5, 3 years later, but it was very fresh. It was very a part of myself I had to hide that I felt shame from.
Yeah.
And in my mind, even now, that's the question I didn't answer that kept me from getting into Yale. Maybe not. Maybe there were other things. You have no way to know. But I know I didn't answer that question well. Because as a 17-year-old, I wasn't equipped to answer that question.
Yeah. I think that we do ask, I mean, like society, college admissions, all of that. We ask and almost demand for kids, because you're a kid when you're applying to college, to be able to explain their trauma. Like, that is a lot of times what an admissions officer is looking for in an essay. Certainly if you have experiences like yours, and where it can be seen on your transcript, there was 1 year that was not successful, and then years that were successful after that. Success, by the way, being defined by grades.
Right.
And adults, myself included, because I help students apply to college, and I have to constantly be watching myself, because there is an understanding that if you can tell the story of what happened, that is going to be beneficial for you in your application.
Right.
But your firsthand experience makes it so plain that that can be a really unfair thing to ask a child to do. you're so close to the trauma. You're also still growing up, like you don't understand it yet. And then, yeah, if you can't do it, then the college admissions office is not getting what they're looking for. And then you don't get the spot.
Yeah. And I feel like there's a section of that process that's really just how good of a storyteller are you? And I'm actually a pretty good storyteller, but that wasn't a story I was ready
to tell,
or even able,
right?
I think, to tell at that point. I didn't even have the diagnosis yet that I could say I have chronic migraines and I'm sick all the time.
Right.
Because that's a really key part of that story that I couldn't tell for maybe 15 years after it happened.
Right. Right.
Because I didn't have those words. I didn't have that information.
Okay. So you have been through so much as a student from the time you were young through college. You found your passion in college. And as you tell us, you were even being affected by like the fear and learning to not have boundaries that you had acquired as a student in school. And yet you were doing what you wanted to do, and you somehow found yourself back working with kids, with students who were in the phase of their life where you were when you went through all of this trauma. How did that feel for you when you started working with kids, and what did it bring up for you, and how does what you went through shape what you do with them?
Yeah. There was kind of never a time that I wasn't working with kids. I worked with the same family all through middle school and high school, babysitting their children. And in college, I was already starting to do like summer camp programs and things like that. So it was a really natural progression into teaching, into engaging with young people in that way. And I've also gotten to have the experience of working with a lot of different populations, working with autistic people, working with people with different disabilities, some similar to me, some with very different experiences. Working, in New York City, we have vastly different populations, people from different cultural backgrounds, people with different economic backgrounds, and it's all layered right on top. New York is a very big little place where we're all layered on top of each other. And I think my ability to stop and listen is really what served me the best in that. Is why is a kid doing or saying the things they're doing or saying? And whether or not they can articulate that doesn't matter. Education is about so much more than, my life is about so much more than teaching someone to juggle. It's what does that person need? It's, or it is about teaching them to juggle. I was doing like a workshop where someone could come try before they signed up for class. And a mom walks up to me, I'm like showing a juggling exercise. And the mom walks up to me and goes, "She can't do this. She only has one hand." And I said, "No, she can do it. She's just going to do it differently."
Mm-hmm.
You can juggle with one hand. You can juggle with no hand. You can juggle with your feet. You can juggle rolling the equipment on your body. But the first thing you need to do is remove that boundary of she can't juggle because she only has one hand.
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't even, sometimes grown-ups put those limitations before a kid ever will, because the kid was already trying to juggle.
Yeah.
The kid didn't notice that she couldn't juggle. No one told her that yet.
Yeah.
I
mean, that even makes me think about you in 9th grade basically being told you can't be in the regular classes because you can't get here at 7 a.m.
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, what we're talking about is, you just said, what if we think about things as not rules, but guidelines? Maybe 7 a.m. works for the majority of our students. 7 a.m. doesn't work for Polly, that doesn't mean that she can't take hard classes, mainstream classes. It means that she has to do it differently. And what does that mean? Now, I recognize that schools, public school systems are under just an impossible amount of constraints.
Yeah.
And so maybe there are times where a particular school is not able to meet a particular need in a particular way. I do think that all of the human beings that work in the school, when we are able to take a step back and not get caught up and not live in our own anxieties, which is hard to do.
Yeah.
I always want to acknowledge this is anything that I'm saying is difficult to do, but it is possible. And if we can take a step back from our own anxieties about keeping our job, which is a big one, about following the rules, about all of the things that we are programmed and taught to do, then we can open our eyes to more possibilities than maybe just Polly needs to go in the emotionally disturbed class, which is not going to meet her needs, but it's what we have.
Are you considering a different educational environment for your child? School Without Suffering's virtual school serves students from elementary through high school, offering developmentally appropriate, comprehensive curriculum that aligns with academic standards while nurturing individual passions and strengths. During each step of their academic journey, we help students master their mindset and their lessons, cultivate compassion for themselves and others, develop their values, and acquire the skills they need to thrive. Our expert teachers employ innovative teaching methods and technology to create engaging and interactive learning experiences for every student. Enrollment in the School Without Suffering virtual school is month to month, allowing for maximum flexibility in meeting your child's unique needs. And with tuition in line with the national average for private schools and a pay-what-you-can option for those who need it, this life-changing educational opportunity is within reach for your family. Download your free parent guide at www.schoolwithoutsuffering.com/guide. That's www.schoolwithoutsuffering.com/guide.
Parents are scared if I disclose that my kid has XYZ, you're not going to let them in circus class. First of all, I'm going to let them in circus class. Any parents out there, your kid's allowed in my circus class. I don't care what alphabet soup of whatever diagnosis they have, your kid's allowed in circus class. There's a spot for them here. But there's fear. Yes. And parents don't want to talk about it. They don't want to let you know what's up because they're worried that that's going to lead to another exclusion, that's going to lead to another othering. And that's another problem. But, I've come to parents and I've been like, I'm noticing this and this and this works and that doesn't work. And all of a sudden the parent goes, oh yeah, they have blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, let's start the conversations here.
Yeah.
Because you just made my job easier because I don't have to guess anymore.
Right. Yeah.
And kids, and ultimately the thing that was true for me is the truth for all kids. No matter how smart you are, no matter how whatever, no matter your upbringing, your whatever, we don't have the words yet. I didn't have the words to tell my pediatrician, if he would have listened or not, what it meant when I don't feel good, quote unquote. A kid who's having processing issues isn't going to have the words to tell you. But the only thing I can hear is that light buzzing right now. Yeah. I can't learn right now because there's a light buzzing over there. That is very sophisticated communication. And it's asking us to communicate. It's asking even an adult to communicate clearly in a situation when you're under duress, when you don't have those basic needs met because you don't feel good or you can't focus or you're not ready to learn.
Right.
And we have to, as adults, stop putting that responsibility on the learner, on the student. And even if we don't know why, why is almost not important. It helps because it means we can get resources, we can get answers, we can get tools, but the why is almost inconsequential until you have someone in an environment where they can learn.
We talk a lot about it is important to not just stop at seeing a behavior and ask the questions of where is it coming from? Why is this happening? But I think it's really important that we don't stop ourselves from taking action that's going to help the child because we don't know why yet. We don't have to know why to take an action that's going to help. We can take an action, see if it helps, and if it doesn't, we can iterate. And that's just as important to get the process going as it is to ask the question why. Because you might not know why for 15 years.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that child has to continue to be in an environment or, be trying to follow rigid rules that just aren't going to work and is going to cause suffering. Another thing that you said that really stuck with me is one of the major reasons that we do this podcast, that at School Without Suffering, we want to do more than tutor, or more than just help the kids that come to us. We want to be consciousness raising about all of this, because the law, as you said, is what directs at least public education, but I would say all education, because all education is in some way related to public education. And that's because education is a social construct and contract.
Right.
We come together to raise our kids, our kids, so that they have what we hope, or what our goal is a basic set of knowledge and skills, so that when they become adults, they can contribute to society. That's the goal, overarching goal of education. Why we do it. Okay, so education is a collective, constructed system that's a social contract that we come up with together. How do we, in our society, organize all of that? We do it through laws. And so laws are a reflection of our larger society as a whole, what we believe and what our values are. That's not to say every individual in the society agrees with how the laws are written. Lots of us don't. That's why we do things like protest and make petitions and all kinds of things. But on the whole, laws come out of collectively what we've said our values are. And so the way the laws are written now have come out of collectively what we've said our values are. So rigid laws about seat time, attendance, funding, all of that stuff do come from us. While I also acknowledge that there are some of us with a lot more power than others, and there's a lot of things broken about our democracy and all of that stuff, which we can also work together on. Yes. But if we acknowledge that our collective values play at least some role, if not a major role, in where these rules come from, then, and if we notice there's something wrong with the rules, then that gives us an opportunity to look at our attitudes and our beliefs and talk about these things and make shifts. And so that's one reason that I think these conversations are so important, is because if we can look at individual stories and we can look at how things are working or not, then we can start to understand where our cognitive dissonances are between, like, yeah, of course, school works that way. It's, it's rough when there's an exceptional child and it doesn't work for them, but, that's just the way things are. But then think about, well, it's not just this one exceptional child. there are lots of ways in which these rules are causing us to not meet the needs of probably most children. And then we can start to think about, okay, well, why do the rules exist? What do we believe that's making that rule exist that way? Do I actually believe that? If I do, why do I believe it? If I have a question about that, let me talk it out. Let me think about it more. And collectively, we can come to a place where we are doing things over time that are more and more going to be beneficial for more and more of us.
And, you know, in accessibility, in the disability community, we talk about every time an adaptation is made for a specific group, it really helps everyone. The most famous example is like closed captioning on TV. Everyone loves closed captioning. You love it at the gym. You love it if you have trouble filtering sound. You love it if, like, everybody's whispering in this show and you don't know what's going on. But it was put there essentially for the deaf community, but it helps everyone. So anytime, if it's going to help your kid, that's not selfish. There's a chance it's going to help 10, 20, 100 other kids. And maybe not even for the same reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was going through my teacher training and we learned about IEPs, we learned about accommodations, and even just differentiation in the classroom. You learn about, you know, all these things that you can do for the child who's having the difficulty. And I would just sit there and be like, well, why can't I do this for every child? And that would be helpful for literally all of them. So yeah. And I think what you just said something about let go. When we get afraid, we tend to want to clamp down and try to control things. And I think that if we can learn to let go of the control a little bit more, that can help the kids who are not being served by the way the rules are written. But I also think that can help the kids who look like they're fine.
Yeah.
There are lots of kids who look like they're fine and who are not. There are also plenty of kids who are fine, but would still be doing better if we could have more flexibility. So I just wanted to highlight that because that's another example to me of what works for one kid or what is good for one kid who seems exceptional can in the long run be good for everyone.
And I was one of those kids. I looked fine until this one requirement came running up against me. I was a straight A student. I have an invisible disability. You can't look at me and go, that's a sick person. That's a disabled person, you know? And yeah, you don't know who you're holding back. You can't know.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Polly, for giving us so much time today. Thank you for sharing your experience and your wisdom. And I just really appreciate it.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun sharing. I think like I said, I think it's a really important story and a different perspective than we usually get on experience in education.
Absolutely. If folks want to find you, especially our listeners in New York who may be interested in your circus classes, where can they do that?
So Polaris Circus is what you want to look for. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I have a YouTube channel that I started during the pandemic that's got like a playlist of circus at home activities that kids could do with things they had around their house for when they just needed to get up and move. So, hey, just come in for free. You don't even have to, I'd love to meet you, but you can just watch the list on YouTube and have some fun activities at home.
Thank you so much again, Polly. You're amazing.
Join us for our final episode of the season, where I'll be speaking with Lisa Richer, mom of 2 neurodiverse sons and founder of Journey to Bloom. With her work stemming from personal experience, Lisa helps parents of neurodiverse learners find and secure the best services, schools, and learning environments for their child's unique needs. If you've ever felt overwhelmed or at a loss about what step to take next to help your child, you won't want to miss our conversation.